Morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning scoop from the Arizona Capital Times. I'm Steve Goldstein. Our topic today, fleet modernization, major savings for Arizona. We have a really distinguished panel of experts with us this morning. You're going to want to listen very closely to what they have to say. Dan Steller, State Director for the Nature Conservancy in Arizona. Diane Brown, who's Executive Director of Arizona PERG Education Fund. Camila Martins-Beckott, Customer Energy Optimization for Tucson Electric Power, or TEP. You may hear me call it TEP through the course of this morning. And Jesse Schneider, who's the EV Manager for ADOT. Everybody, thank you for being here. I know it's early in the morning, so thanks very much for joining us for this very important panel. Also want to let everyone know who's watching right now with us live that you will have opportunities to throw in a question here and there. We'll do our best to answer them, and we'll do our best to sort of make it in the flow of the conversation. So if you're someone who posts a question early on in this hour and it's getting to be 30 minutes in and you haven't heard it yet, doesn't mean we're not going to get to it. We just want to have it in a really good point of the conversation to give our experts a real chance to think about it and actually have it in the flow of what we're doing. So again, as we go throughout the process, please feel free to put a question in there and we'll get to them as soon as we possibly can. But now let's get started. Dan, I want to go to you first because we're going to spend a lot of time on the webinar discussing positive impact that EVs have in a broader sense. We'll be getting into some very important detail, how things are changing here in Arizona. But I want to ask you first, just to get us warmed up, what's your personal experience as being an EV owner?
Yeah, great. Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate the chance to have this conversation. So I got my EV in 2021, and I know I'm not, certainly the only person here within EV, but it has been a fascinating journey. So I was really motivated at the time, really by the environmental benefits of one. And, I live somewhere where I do a lot of single occupancy vehicle driving. And so I figured it was at least one thing I could do on the environmental front. I got at the time the electric Ford Mustang, and there was probably a little bit of a midlife crisis there too, because I'd always wanted a Mustang, and then the idea that I could get an electric one was kind of perfect. And it's really been wonderful. At the time, 4 or 5 years ago, non-Tesla EVs were quite rare on the roads, which we forget now because they're so much more common. But they were really, somewhat unusual at that time. And so I liked the idea of being an early adopter with it as well. I didn't fully understand, but I've learned since the real economic benefits of an EV. We say that a statistic that's often used is that EVs are about the equivalent of paying $1.15, $1.16 a gallon for gas. I think in Arizona, depending on how you manage it and time your charging, it can even be a lot less than that. So, I often end up paying probably the equivalent of 50, 60 cents a gallon. I've had basically no maintenance on it in that time. And, it sort of makes sense, right? Because there's so few moving parts. There's not as much need for maintenance. So the car still feels as new as when I got it. And it's really just been a wonderful way to drive and a fun way to drive too, as well as an environmentally and economically beneficial one, I think. And I'm really glad Jesse will talk more about this. On the other side, the public charging infrastructure is still not ideal in this country. It wasn't ideal when I got my car 4 or 5 years ago, and still not ideal. I think it's improving a lot, but I think, EVs still, at least in my experience, work best. And we're going to talk a lot about fleets and fleet management, but in situations when charging can really be managed and is predictable, then EVs are a fantastic solution. And that's, certainly been my experience of it.
Thanks, Daniel. We will get to a lot of those things. Camila, let me go to you about TEP specifically. How much work is TEP doing to assist with EV fleet plans? And can you give us some details on some of that planning?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. So I would say that TEP's role in fleet electrification has evolved over the years. Before we had a formal transportation electrification implementation plan, which was approved by the Arizona Corporation Commission, we did a lot of informal sort of consulting with our customers, right? They would come to us as the electric utility, very natural, very normal for them to come to us. And we would just provide them with technical assistance, guiding them through here's where the trends are, here's the types of vehicles that we're seeing. And that kind of helped inform what we put into our plan, which is like a formal fleet advisory service. And so we have provided both the school districts, Tucson Unified School District and Flowing Wells School District, with fleet phasing plans so that they could take advantage of federal EPA dollars for their electric school buses. We also did the same thing for the city of Tucson and their transit system. And so they have approximately 11 electric transit buses, as well as some electric paratransit vans, and we help them with that planning process. We just recently launched an online calculator, which is available to everybody. So if you go to the TEP website and go over to our EV site, you'll see the calculator there. It's meant as like an introductory tool so that, you know, a fleet manager can be like, okay, where do I start, right? It's a complex process. And so, you know, we've evolved from like informal consultants to really providing our customers with some hard data that they can use to start making some decisions around their fleet planning. And then finally, for those that are really interested in moving forward, we provide these detailed fleet analyses, which kind of cover like a total cost of ownership, as well as like some phasing and infrastructure estimates.
Great. Okay. Now, Diane, big picture. For those who are not as familiar with Arizona PERG Education Fund, I think people have probably seen different studies and PERG and Arizona PERG Education Fund is attached to it, but I'd like you to give us a little background. What does the organization do? And then part two, and take as much time as you need to explain this. How did that role lead to PERG being in this EV space, this EV area?
Sure. So the Arizona Public Interest Research Group Education Fund, or Arizona PERG Education Fund, is a statewide organization that conducts research and education on issues in the public interest with a focus on protecting consumers. Why the EV space? Simply put, EVs are good for Arizona consumers. Dan started touching a little bit upon it, and I think we'll get into more detail, but you know, research has documented that financial savings are there for utility ratepayers, whether or not they drive an EV, through better utilization of the electrical grid. In addition, research has documented the thousands of dollars in consumer savings by driving an EV over an internal combustion engine. EVs also benefit air quality and public health, each of which has positive financial impacts and is also good for our state.
Jesse, let me kick it off to you on this first one. Again, we'll get into more detail as the hour progresses, but I want to get a brief background on how you got involved in working with the Arizona Department of Transportation, ADOT, and the EV charging project, because you have a background that is a perfect fit for that. But how did it end up leading you to ADOT?
Well, thank you for that. Well, first of all, very honored to be here. Yeah, so I've worked over 30 years in automotive before I came to ADOT. I worked actually in zero-emission vehicles for over 25 years. So I've been driving different types of electrified vehicles for many years on the development side. So in fact, the times that I came to Arizona at that time were really testing and desert proving grounds, things like that. Yeah, so I've worked on forward-looking projects and really came to the realization that one of the biggest bottlenecks, as you know, is that infrastructure needs to be ubiquitous if you want to have, you know, it's not the chicken and the egg, it's the chicken omelet. You know, you have to have, you know, the infrastructure to really reduce range anxiety. And was given, you know, basically an offer to help out in a statewide level, and that was really exciting. So that's kind of what led me over as an environmentalist at my core. How can I best help? So yeah, the early days of electrification, you had to kind of do both. You had to do the work on the vehicle and work on the infrastructure. So I've on many projects I've done that. So I've actually installed chargers myself in the past. And also, you know, worked on vehicles at BMW and a few other automakers as well.
So what is the difference for you in private sector versus public sector? Is there Do both fit into your areas of expertise? Do both fit into, are they, and are they maybe coalescing a little bit better now than they did a number of years ago?
Well, I mean, it's hard to generalize private sector, but I can just say that state of Arizona is very forward thinking. Uh, the Hobbs administration has the #2 priority for traffic, for ADOT after safety. So safety is #1, is actually accelerating electrified vehicles, accelerating EVs. And so it's a very high priority for the government. And, we get a lot of, you won't see it now, but in the next few years, every year, there's going to be a tranche of new stations coming in. And we think that it really, the biggest thing right now is if you look just to our neighbor states, if you look to the west, you'll see that its EV adoption is about 25%, which is awesome. If you look at nationwide, it's closer to 8 or 9%. If you look at Arizona today, it's about 2%. So we think that this will make the big difference in getting things off the ground.
Terrific. Diane, let's go big picture. New research shows that Arizona local governments can save more than $100 million over the next decade or so by having EVs replace retiring vehicles in fleets. And that is obviously the main topic of our conversation today. How will those savings be realized? And how quickly can that happen? How quickly are we going to see these vehicles, these retiring vehicles replaced?
Great question. Let me first start by stating that the research that we conducted along with the Frontier Group and the Nature Conservancy Arizona is really a conservative estimate. So as a purchase price of EVs drop, which we've seen significantly in the last few years, if gas prices rise, if government vehicles are on the road for longer than 10 years, we can expect even greater savings. To your question, EV savings primarily occur through reduced operating and maintenance costs. So, Dan kind of touched upon this, but EVs cost less to fuel than gas-powered vehicles, and EVs have fewer moving parts than internal combustion engines, requiring less routine maintenance. Oil changes are a good example of the reduced maintenance needs. Jesse mentioned some of the work that the state is doing. We've also seen a number of municipalities across the state, both in some of the more urban areas, some of the more rural areas, that have started that transition already. Our advice and the research that we conducted really looks at transitioning vehicles as they retire. So we're not looking to take vehicles that are on the road today in government fleets off. We're saying as they retire to replace them with electric. And, Jesse mentioned some of the stats. We have seen that while it may be, closer to 2% statewide in some of the more urban areas, that percentage is higher and continuing to grow. And we think with more of the charging stations that are coming along the interstate into the alternative fuel corridors, that certainly is going to help a lot of the connectivity that government fleets and individuals and businesses need to feel assured they can get from point A to point B.
Oh, that's interesting. It was both Dan and Jesse, you sort of referred to that a bit. Dan, let me go to you on that. When you became an early adopter, how much at that time were you concerned about the infrastructure, being able to charge? And is that the kind of question that people who don't have EVs but are looking into it and want to do it, are there still some nerves related to, well, what if I get stuck somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, that's even still probably the most common question I get about having an EV, or when you're talking to people about it. Certainly, range anxiety is a real thing. As mentioned, when I got mine in 2021, the charging infrastructure was even less developed than it is today. And so certainly it was a factor. I also think even then, and certainly now, it is also one that really can be managed pretty easily. I mean, first of all, the vast majority of time, right, drive 15, 20, 30, 40 miles a day. Now, I do think it is a real privilege to be able to live in a single family house and, control your own ability to charge a vehicle and install charging infrastructure. So that's a huge issue, which I think still really requires a lot of thinking about and a lot of thought to how to make them, but for how to make EVs accessible to people who don't live in single family houses, then that is a different thing. But yeah, it certainly was something I thought about. I would say it has never been an issue for me, and I've certainly taken mine out of town, and I know others on this call have as well. But it is something you have to think about. It is a factor, and certainly I do think there's a real chicken and egg thing here, in that the more we can build out that charging infrastructure and that people are not worried about even the perception of it. I think it's probably, in my opinion, often more perception than a reality, but certainly managing that perception is critical to scaling up EV adoption.
Dan,
Steve,
Jesse
if I
said
can
chicken
just
and
jump
omelet,
in.
though. Yes, Dan, jump in. Yes.
I was just going to jump in real quick because Dan mentioned kind of the average, miles that most people drive in a day. One of the things that we found is a lot of individuals are kind of 5 years, 10 years in the past with the state of transportation electrification. And so while that miles traveled may not have shifted as dramatically, what has shifted is the range that a lot of vehicles can get. And so a lot of the newer models, models within the last couple of years can go now, over 250 miles. And so for a lot of households, that may mean 1 time, 2 times you need to charge during the course of the week. And so I think, it is one of the factors that we often hear, and we want to make sure that folks know, just like Dan mentioned, kind of Teslas, there are over 100 models today as well. I think a lot of times people, kind of fail to recognize all of the significant technology and the technological improvements that have been made.
Well, Jesse, this is where we're going to leave the floor to you for a little bit. Let's talk about the infrastructure, what it will take, and also whether, not giving away anything, but you recently traveled to California, and can you tell us about, I'm not saying you would ever have range anxiety because you've been in the business for so long, but can you tell us about what that drive was like in terms of feeling comfortable driving from Arizona to California in your EV?
Okay. Well, let me first talk about the status of what's happening in Arizona regarding charging, and then I'll get on to my vacation trip if you needed to. But really, what's really exciting is that last year we had our first solicitation out, and we awarded 18 sites. We call them EV stations, but they're actually at least 4 spots. In some cases, they're up to 8. It's a minimum of 4 spots. All of this is high DC fast charging, which means that 150 kilowatts and up. Most of them are actually above 150 kilowatts. And all of our interstate highways will have every 50 miles a station, and that all those are going to be constructed next year. That's the good part. We actually haven't announced yet. In the next 7 days, we're going to announce there's going to be a solicitation coming up for 34 sites. This is all under the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which was somewhat paused earlier this year. Arizona and 13 other states went actually participated in the lawsuit, which we won, and we were basically given the green light to get going on the projects. And what's even better is that so next year we're going to have our solicitation starts this year and awarding sites next year, 34 sites. What's also new is that we have a 2025 plan that looks like we're going to get another 13 sites for 2027. So we're really, what we're talking about is most of the highways in Arizona will have electric vehicle infrastructure stations funded through this project. It's along the AFC routes, as Diane mentioned, the alternative route corridors. And that's it has to be on national highways. But if you go to the azdot.gov website, you'll actually find the EV plan. And that's a great resource to actually look at the details. Now I'll get to the fun part. I certainly on the personal level. Yeah, so there is right now between here and Destination California, 1 site along the 10. That's a port site, which is great. But if they're, during holidays, as Dan can probably also allude to, if you ever travel on a holiday, you feel that range anxiety when you're sitting in line waiting to charge. But that's one thing that we're going to help correct from our the Arizona side. In California, there are let's just say simply more chargers, and so it's not a problem to find a charge in California or find a location for sites, and that's something we're likewise in Arizona we're going to change soon. So look forward to that.
This might be an obvious question, Jesse. I'm not sure if it's to you or to Diane or anyone. Please feel free to jump in. When we talk about at this point, relatively low percentage of Arizonans who've adopted EVs. You have the number around 2% or so compared to nationally. How much of a difference, potentially, again, this is not a prediction, just wondering your perspective, how much of a difference can the infrastructure, the real infrastructure, but also the perception people have in their minds of feeling like they can take these trips and not feel the range anxiety? How much of a difference do you think this practical seeing more charging stations, seeing them along the highway will have people say, oh, all right, now I feel more comfortable doing that? How much do you think that in and of itself will make the difference?
I could start. I could field part of this, Dana, and then we hand it over to you. If that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, great. Well, yeah. So it's a big factor. Because if you're traveling with your family and you want to go somewhere, you want to make sure that you can get there without you don't think about today with gasoline, so to speak, or diesel, because they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. So it's a really big deal. The good thing I forgot to mention is in Maricopa County is about 9%, which is still, it's much higher. But Maricopa also has a lot more infrastructure. You see a lot more of the different, I'll just name a few, Electrify America, Blink, and ChargePoint. If we're not trying to, play favorites. It's just that there's a lot of companies that are already starting in Maricopa County. There's a few others that are making their way, to different places in Flagstaff and, up north, things like that. But that's the rural charging is the challenging part, not the urban charging. So that's because you can get a lot more of even if you go to ASU or other places, you'll find lots of the low power AC charging. That's great. But if you want to be up and out in 20-25 minutes, really, if you can, and that's where you need the high power charger. So yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Great. Diane?
Yeah, to add on to that, I think the reality matters and the perception matters. There are a lot of EV enthusiasts, early adopters in Arizona, and there's a whole community of folks that are communicating when a charging station is down or when they struggle to find a station. We've seen a lot of improvements over the last number of years, some of that because of some of the federal funding that has come in. But quite frankly, I think a lot of it has to do with municipalities. Camilla mentioned some of what Tucson's doing, Pima County. There's a ton of examples in Maricopa County, the county itself, and even in a number of rural areas, municipalities have made some of these commitments. And so to the extent that people are going to the library or going to shop on a main street and they see electric vehicle charging that is available, they feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more likely to consider purchasing an EV if they are looking to buy new or used.
Camila, can I have you jump in on that just as somebody who's involved with major utility? And then because part of me, and this is going to sound like an old Phoenician, which is what I am, driving down I-10, we talked for years, those are going to be a rail line. Well, of course, not in our lifetimes, we wouldn't think. So how much of a difference can it make? Even some of those places are less rural than they used to be off I-10, but they're still somewhat rural. Can you talk about that a little bit? Sort of the Tucson area and the Tucson to Phoenix commute that many people do.
Yeah. So, I agree with what the panelists have said in terms of having that viable infrastructure visible. It really does alleviate, as somebody that has traveled back and forth on a electric company vehicle between Phoenix and Tucson, I'm very thankful for the charging stations at Casa Grande, right? Which kind of gets to the other piece of like the availability of the infrastructure, which is why I appreciate kind of the diligence that ADOT is doing in and around these NEVI stations, is like the uptime requirement and all of the requirements that they had in their request for proposals to ensure that not only is the charging infrastructure there, but it's working, because that is also another thing that I think a lot of drivers get frustrated with, right? Like they see it on the map and they get there and for some reason it's not working. And so looking forward to those charging stations coming in and kind of filling those gaps throughout the state.
Jesse, can I go back to I know we've talked about numbers, but just in case people are tuning in a little bit late and didn't hear them, how is the state doing right now in terms of charging stations? And is there the short term, is there a longer term plan as well? Is there something that people could look for and say, I mean, I don't want you to give away numbers that aren't public yet, but is there a feeling that as the growth goes, that the growth is going to continue? If there's that push for it, if there's financing for it, can we see this process continue to grow in Arizona?
So we're in the middle of really just starting a 5-year plan in terms of rollout. So that's the great part about this discussion is I can say on the private sector, as I mentioned, there's already stations that, I mentioned, there's Casa Grande, there's Tucson, there are stations in cities that are around. It's not that there's nothing, but we're trying to connect the dots between all the big cities and small cities around California, actually around Arizona, excuse me. And Arizona has a lot of square miles to take care of. In terms of, I think I might have lost your question. Sorry.
Well, no, I just really wanted to review because we do have folks sort of tuning in and out. Just talk about the progress that's being made. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
In terms of numbers, we call a station with at least four different chargers, and in many cases it's up to 8. And so just when I said EV sites, essentially, last year we were lucky. I'm just repeating from before. So last year we had a solicitation that was successful. We have 18 sites that are going to go on the major highways in Arizona. So connecting north, west, and northeast, north, south, east, west. So in terms of all the different highways, the 10, the 40, 17, all of the larger interstates. We have an addition within a week. We actually are going to have another solicitation out for 34 sites all around on national highways in Arizona. That's coming out very soon. You've heard it here first, by the way. It's actually going to be public on Friday. And in addition, the U.S. government has just accepted our additional plan. It's called 2025 plan, and we have an additional 13 sites that are going in. It would be the 2027 timeframe. So we've got a number of years to build out. In terms of future, we think that this will be the spark that will really ignite and get other companies interested in infrastructure, but also especially customers feeling really comfortable about they could travel anywhere, from here to the Grand Canyon to the Four Corners, all the way to Nogales, and we're charging without worrying about it.
Yeah, and Diane, this certainly sounds like the big in bright bold letters progress. What do you think of that? What sort of progress is being made here?
Yeah, a lot. Let me first, though, I have to say that Phoenix to Tucson rail is not out of the question and not out of the question for our lifetime, Steve. So one day we can ride that together, hopefully.
Okay, I hope so. Not gonna wood. Yes, sorry.
Yes, but that aside, so Jesse kind of mentioned a lot of the charging that is happening along the highways in Arizona. There's also a lot of charging stations, as we've discussed throughout the state. And I believe Capital Times will send out some links afterwards. So I won't get bogged down too much in statistics right now, but that kind of it'll give a sense of some of the growth that has happened there. One stat that I would throw out, though, is that when you look at just EV ownership in 2020, there were 29,000 EVs in our state, and today we're closer to 90,000 EVs. So there, again, has been, quite a bit of progress in terms of just people understanding and making that transition to electric. I'd also say that we are hearing more and more as cost prices come down in purchasing an EV, and also as, again, the availability of charging stations are out there, and people are recognizing those, that uptick is likely to continue to grow exponentially within the next few years.
Mila, let me throw that to you as well, just because of the communities you work with at TEP. Is there a feeling that progress is in big, bold letters there as well?
Absolutely. I think it's sort of a great opportunity that we work in a community that has a lot of planning in place when it comes to fleet electrification. So the city of Tucson has their climate action plan, which calls for fleet electrification of both their transit and then their own fleets, and then Pima County as well. They've been at the forefront of this fleet conversion. They had a goal tied to the Paris Accord, and so they actually have converted all of their light duty fleet already, and they're well on their way to converting their light duty trucks, and have a plan to continue. And so we've partnered with them a lot, both in the infrastructure rollout as well as kind of that fleet management best practices, which kind of goes back to the technical assistance that we offer. And I think in general, right, here in Tucson, between the businesses that have decided to install charging stations as an amenity for their customers, and the otherwise available charging stations throughout the community, and at, for example, customers that come to TEP facilities, we have charging stations for them as well. I think people really are seeing that progress. And, you know, I just echo what everybody's saying here. I think between the state level involvement and then the local involvement with the utilities in between, kind of playing that conduit, I think everybody's really rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, Dan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that we've talked a little bit about, but I think is underlies a lot of this, which is that, of course, the federal tax incentives for EV ownership are going away. And, you know, certainly no was a factor for me when I bought mine. I mean, they were material and it was significant. As Diane said, costs are coming down very, very significantly anyway in EV ownership, or in EV purchase price, but how it affects EV ownership, I think, you know, is a little bit of an unknown. It'll be interesting to see now. But what I do also want to say, and I think Diane mentioned this, but I'll just underline it because it really struck me with regard to the research that we did, and that figure of $100 million, which, you know, really is, I think, in a lot of ways a conservative number. That's without federal tax incentives. So from a fleet management perspective, even without those federal incentives, the math still holds for sure. And so I think that's a really important point to make. You know, the math is really there from a business case.
Yeah, Diane, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because that was one of the reasons that we wanted to really explore the potential cost savings for government fleets, both the state and local. And I would say a lot of the research really can translate to business fleets as well. And you know, what we found, and again, we'll make sure that the links go out afterwards for folks who haven't seen it yet. But, you know, if you just look at the government fleets and you look particularly at SUVs and pickup trucks and vans, which is really the kind of dominant force of the overall fleets, that's where you get that $100 million in savings. And, you know, if you look at cars, which was not part of this analysis because it's a lower percentage that's used, you know, there's also a lot of savings that can come there depending on the amount of miles that are driven. And one of the things that I think we didn't look at in this research but we have seen places in Arizona, I like to point to ASU is a good example here, have really gotten innovative. And again, a lot of technological advances and data analysis has really helped to look at, if you do have a larger fleet, how do you best manage that? How are you making sure that the EVs that you have in the fleet are the ones that are going the longer distances? Because again, you're going to save on fuel there. How are you making sure that you don't just have vehicles kind of sitting in the parking lot, but that you're maximizing their use among different entities? So at ASU, they have really kind of developed a good model for looking at when faculty and when staff use the vehicle so that they aren't sitting still and that they are kind of maximizing, again, the cost savings.
Well, Jesse, you were nodding your head. I wonder if, so can you address a little bit how the, maybe a totally obvious logical question, but how fleet modernization and infrastructure, greater opportunities to have charging stations will work in sync going forward too? The idea that, yes, if you modernize your fleet, but there are no more charging stations, that doesn't help. But if they work together,
Yeah.
and all these charging stations you're talking about, it seems like a lot more progress can be made there.
I mean, I think Diane was speaking definitely very well about the fleets and the charging. I think one thing I should say, many fleets have their own AC charging dedicated. Part of Camila was also talked about it as well, that are, you know, up to 1942 kilowatts. In fact, the state of Arizona has a fleet of Mach-E's and a fleet of, you know, some Lightnings, and we charge those vehicles overnight with level 2. You know, so fleet vehicles can benefit from that. But sometimes, you know, if you talk about our ADOT, you have to travel, if you're on the highway, you have to travel for some projects, you know, a few hundred miles each way. And those particular occasions, you're definitely going to need to get DC charging, which we'll see better because we have employees that, and I've gone myself to things from the Nogales or projects in the Four Corners and Navajo Reservation, things like that. And we've had to use DC charging because I always travel. I try to, you know, always travel electric. So I think that it will just give the flexibility of EV fleets what they didn't have before, which was the ability kind of to fill and go anywhere in the state instead of just be around the circle of where they have AC charging.
Yeah, if I
Yes,
could
go
build
ahead.
on that just quick. I think, Jesse, you're pointing to like the importance of fleet planning, right? You want to have like the right vehicle for the right job and the right charging infrastructure for the right vehicle and job, right? And so that's part of like the services. I know, you know, TP offers it. I know SRP and APS also offer fleet advisory services, right? Like to help customers understand, like, okay, if you are primarily an in-town kind of fleet, level 2 chargers, they're going to get you what you need. If you are a fleet kind of like what you're describing, Jesse, yeah, you're going to need a mix, right? But how do we right size the transition so that you're being really diligent with your dollars?
Well, and
Can
how
I
much?
just
Yeah,
jump
go
in?
ahead, Dan. Yes.
Camilla, I think, really hit it, something that is fundamental. We have, and I'll throw in the chat, and again, this will get sent around afterwards, but you know, kind of a roadmap, and it really kind of helps. I think, again, we kind of develop this for government fleets, but again, I think it's very applicable to businesses as well. And part of that really starts with having a commitment of what you want to do with your fleet and sticking to it. And so as part of that kind of next step, it's having the detailed electrification plan that can help set those purchasing priorities and also guide investments in charging infrastructure. One of the big parts of the roadmap, and one of the areas that we've talked to the state about, as well as some municipalities and some county conversations underway, is to really look at procurement opportunities, particularly in government, thinking about how to leverage the taxpayer dollars to maximize, again, the savings for local governments, for the state as a whole, there's some really significant purchasing power that can take place. And then one of the points that we also have is making sure that you are taking advantage of some of those utility resources. So as Camilla mentioned, TP, but also APS and SRP have some really good incentives and great fleet analysis programs. And we highly encourage folks to call their utility and work with them on a plan that makes sense.
Yeah, and sorry,
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
real quick, and then I just want to say to this point about fleet management and thinking about the economics of it. Again, we look at one of the things I really love about this research that we did with Diane's group is it really is all starting with options that are available right now, right? There's no fleet managers can start realize these savings really easily with models and types of models that are available now. There are no kind of assumptions about, like for example, we didn't look at electrifying a lot of emergency response vehicles because that's a different conversation, right? There's a lot that can be done right now with readily available models as existing vehicles retire that fleet managers can be thinking about that can start today with the market as it is right now.
Since we're about 2/3 of the way through the conversation, just want to remind folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. Fleet modernization, major savings for Arizona. Panelists are Dan Steller, State Director for the Nature Conservancy in Arizona, Diane Brown, Executive Director of Arizona PERG Education Fund, Camila Martins-Beckett, she's a Customer Energy Optimization for Tucson Electric Power, or TEP, and Jesse Schneider, who's EV Manager for ADOT. Dan, I want to stick with you because there's a big question that was brought up early on in the conversation that we've addressed a little bit, but how does fleet modernization fit into Arizona moving more toward a clean energy economy?
Yeah, we saw it in the last, 5-10 years. We've seen a real thriving clean energy economy develop in Arizona. And that's a lot of that has really been things that support EV markets and manufacturing, whether it's Lucid, whether that's different battery companies, different types of clean energy technology. There was, the analysis that we've seen is about $14.5 billion of investment in Arizona in the clean energy economy running through 2024. A lot of that had to do with federal incentives from the IRA and the IIJA, which now are changing. So we don't know and this is, I think, to be seen how that pace of that investment will continue. But certainly there's been tremendous clean energy investment in the Arizona economy. That's been really wonderful for our economy and has really been diversified across the state. Some of that's in Tucson and Casa Grande and in Queen Creek. There's really just been, a really wide-ranging investment there. So, I wouldn't go so far as to say that any given fleet procurement decision inherently benefits that economy. But it is certainly also true, I think, that when we make large-scale procurement decisions that support the kind of economy and innovation that we're seeing in clean energy in Arizona, that is very symbiotic, and that's a good thing in that sense.
Diane, you want to talk about that?
I think Dan really kind of nailed it. We are seeing that there's really a cradle to grave industry when it comes to EVs in our state. And I think that has really helped to also spur a lot of the recognition of EVs, their contributions to the economy, and has helped, get more folks in those vehicles, whether to test them out or to drive them on our roads.
I want to go to a couple of viewer questions here. This comes from Julie. EVs are cheaper to operate currently, but with electricity rates going up, it might really incentivize Arizona fleets to also install rooftop solar. Can buses have their own roof-mounted solar panels? So that's something anyone can answer.
I can get to that.
Thanks, Camila.
So, as the panelists have mentioned, right, like the real savings with EVs is on the operations and maintenance. And part of that savings comes from the fact that electricity is a cheaper fuel than gasoline and diesel. With increases in prices, right, due to inflation and additional investments that the utilities have made in the existing infrastructure, I think Julie brings up a good point, right? Like, is that operational savings kind of closing in a little bit? And two things on that. One is like the importance of talking to your utility to make sure that you're on the right rate for your fleet so that you're able to charge your vehicles at the lowest rate, so that you're able to like retain those operational savings. Additionally, a lot of the utilities also have managed charging programs. While most of them are on the residential side right now, the path is paved for it to kind of transition over to fleets. Gets a little bit complicated, but also that is something that the combination of like the active managed charging plus the right rates, you can still see a lot of savings from that conversion. Primarily all of the sites that we have worked on when it comes to large fleet sites, for example, SunTran, which is the transit system here in Tucson, their facility has solar, and we installed charging stations there. The truth of it is, if you're charging, 11 electric buses all overnight, your solar panels aren't going to do much for you unless you have corresponding battery storage. But for those that do have daytime charging, right, like of course you can utilize the production from the solar panels. It just then becomes, how big is the solar panel and how much is it really offsetting, because these larger buses, right, probably also need DC fast charging. And so you kind of got to figure out like what's the size of the solar field that you need in order to charge your fleet. And there's a balance there, which is why we always advocate for, being on the right rate and participating in the utility programs to minimize costs.
Well, and I think that, solar technology is obviously also developing quite a bit, as is battery storage. The other, I think, part of all of this is that for those that are managing fleets, we really encourage them, as I said, for the fleet assessments, to talk to their utility, but also to let them know what they think might be helpful for them when it comes to charging, knowing more about their patterns as well. The utilities, typically as part of rate cases, will look at any adjustments that they're going to make. SRP earlier this year made some changes in terms of when their peak periods of time are and when it will be best suited for folks to charge, and there's incentives in those electric rates there. And so while that's not something the utilities typically can just turn on a switch and make happen, that kind of input I think is really helpful to be able to look at what some of the patterns may be beyond what some of the forecasts are that the utilities have, and to kind of work in sync to make sure that the rates are lower, even though we know, driving an EV is less expensive than an internal combustion engine, but also to kind of maximize the grid, which again has savings for all ratepayers.
Jesse, as our infrastructure expert, do you have anything to piggyback with that?
No, I think that was very well said. We don't really talk much about rates, although we want to make sure that they're fair. So we do monitor it's also part of the NEVI program, but we don't get as much I mean, certainly that's really a question for Camilla and others. I think it's other great questions and stuff like that.
Well, Jesse, let me ask you this one. We have a question from Matt, and I'm intrigued by this, and this could be for folks who are watching not live, but who are watching the video later and are intrigued by just EVs generally, along with fleet modernization. Is there a place for hybrids or plug-in hybrids for those who are not yet ready to go full electric, or does that eliminate the savings in maintenance?
Oh, plug-in hybrids make a big difference, and so do hybrids as well. So you can look at the different vehicle manufacturers and their claims, but you can get, the newest plug-in hybrids are give you about 40 miles of range, which if you're doing a commute, which is really good. Usually they use level 2 charging. They not necessarily. I think there's one OEM that actually can do level 3, but it still is a significant savings, even at the price of gasoline today. Under $4. So yeah, hybrids. There's a double benefit to hybridization as well. That's also, I think Dan alluded to it. The wear and tear on the vehicle, it extends the miles of the car, and also, for instance, brakes and things like that. So hybrids are definitely worth it, as well as plug-in hybrids, but it has to make sense because you have to have for plug-in hybrids, you have to at least have a few kilowatts in your garage that you can charge. Because 110 may not be an overnight charge. Besides that, yeah.
Camila, I'm really curious. Again, throwing this out from someone who is sort of, I guess, speaking for the masses to some extent. When it comes to, obviously, we're focused on EVs, but have you seen modernization of fleets over the past decade or so as groups went more to, I used to work for a place that had a lot of Priuses around and that sort of thing. Is this a natural step then to go from gas-powered vehicles to hybrid and now to fully to EV? Does that make sense for most communities?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we've seen. I think it really is sort of specific to your fleet and your driver's level of comfort, right? But that transition really is one that makes sense, and it's always an easier switchover. But we did see a lot of other fleets just making the transition from an internal combustion engine vehicle to a full EV. And you know, that's what we did internally at TEP. And similar to what I think it was Jesse was mentioning, right? Like we didn't do an accelerated conversion. We just, as the fleet ages out, the ones that we purchase are either EVs or hybrids, depending on the use case for that particular vehicle. But we took a lot of time to kind of inform our drivers of the change and allow them to test drive the vehicles before we assigned them to the different groups. And so we kind of had this like internal ambassadorship going, so that when we did bring on the vehicles, we had a good level of adoption and high levels of satisfaction.
Diana and Dan, I'm curious about this. We've touched a little bit about the economic benefits, but I also wanted to ask, and Dan, you're probably a great person to start with on this one. Actually, we've been lucky the last few days here in the Valley, especially to get some rain, but we also go long periods of time where it's drought, it's getting hotter, and we know that our summers also have been, real bastions of not great air quality. So how could moving fleet modernization when it comes to this, especially people who are driving around, whether it's all around the state, as Jesse mentioned, or just in town, how much of a difference could this make in terms of air quality, people's health here in Arizona?
Yeah, I think it's actually great that, we're at the last 10 minutes of the conversation before we talk about the environmental benefit, because really the economic ones are, the case is there, right? And I think that is a really important takeaway from this is, from the economic side, the case is there. But yeah, certainly there are significant environmental benefits to electrification. And we see that certainly on the greenhouse gas side related to emissions that contribute to climate change. Roughly speaking, transportation sector accounts for about a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's been a stubborn sector in the sense that it's been hard to really, it's a hard number to get down that quarter, that 25% there. So yes, electrification, really matters, and doing it at a large scale, at the fleet scale, really can have a significant difference. The research that we did about state and municipal fleets transitioning over in the $100 million of savings that we keep talking about is also the equivalent of taking about 80,000 internal combustion engine vehicles off the road. So, it is really significant there if you think about the contributors on the greenhouse gas side. And then, yes, certainly on the air quality side, thinking about getting 81,000 the emissions from 81,000 vehicles off the road, there is a real significant benefit to a lot of the precursor emissions to ozone. If we look at nitrogen oxides and VOCs, that certainly those come down hugely when we transition to electric vehicles. And while individual decisions are great and critical, fleet management decisions really can move that needle significantly.
Diane, how do you think that all works in sync together? The economic benefits, but also environmental benefits, overall quality of life improvement?
I mean, they go hand in hand. Dan mentioned one of my favorite stats, other than the economics, in terms of the equivalent of taking about 80,000 cars off the road. And I think that is just, or I should say, not off the road, but the amount kind of produced by 80,000 typical cars. Another stat in that same category is more than a million barrels of oil. I think one of the things that we've seen is that when you're looking at, the economics and the environmental impacts, more and more, there is the case that they do go hand in hand. You're helping to save money for consumers. At the same time, you're reducing some the air pollution and the adverse public health impacts. To us as a consumer organization, we also recognize that there are costs that happen to the economy when you fail to meet air quality standards. And there are also costs to individuals and to families when you are paying for emergency room visits because your kid has an asthma attack, or because you have respiratory illness and you have additional medications that you're taking for that. So it all, I think, really kind of fits together, which is why I think this is one of those areas that we often talk about as a kind of a win-win-win for our state.
Camila, finally to you on that one. Is that something that the communities that TEP works with, is that something that comes up in addition to say that, because obviously Tucson itself is a desert area, just like the Phoenix area is?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mentioned earlier that the city of Tucson has a climate action plan, and they do have a carbon emissions target. We ourselves have a carbon neutral target by 2050. And so part of our fleet operations is that, and supporting the communities that we serve with their climate action goals to the extent that we can, is always how we like to operate.
So we're down to our last 3 minutes or so. And I think this is a good time to hopefully we can all, I know this is difficult. We'll try to do it in 45 seconds to a minute from each of you. Diane, let me go to you first. What is the biggest takeaway you'd like people who've been with us this hour, or just cut in for a few minutes here and there, the biggest takeaway from this conversation?
I'll start where I just ended. Electric vehicles are a win-win-win for Arizona. Transitioning fleets, whether it's government, business, can help to save money, help protect air quality, help protect public health. We have a great case in Arizona from the types of industries that we have here that are helping to perpetuate this movement. We've seen more and more individuals move in this direction, and we know that more charging is coming. We know that electric vehicles are dropping in price, and we know that the future is electric, and we encourage folks to continue to move in that direction and are here to help any way we can.
Terrific. Thank you. Dan, what's your takeaway?
That was super well said. So the only thing I'll add to that is just that these are decisions, again, that can be made now. This isn't some future state that we're talking about. Certainly it will get better and better in the future, for a lot of what Jesse and Camilla have been talking about there, and as the infrastructure improves. But the economic, again, if we just focus on that, the economic case is there right now, and it pencils out, to say nothing of the really tremendous environmental benefits, which it's all possible right now.
And Jesse, what about you?
Oh, thank you. So I'll leave with, the state of Arizona is about to significantly support the increase of infrastructure along the highways. We hope that it impacts and the acceleration of adoption to increase. We really think it's due to certainly local and global emissions have an impact on that. So if you have any questions, the best thing to do regarding the status of the Arizona is to go to azdot.gov/EV plan. And you'll see the progress, and there's also a place to ask questions. So thank you for that.
Terrific. And Camila, you got the last word for us. What's your takeaway from today?
Yeah, the takeaway from each day is there might be a lot of uncertainty out there in regards to federal policies and federal incentives. the utilities throughout Arizona, and I'll speak particularly to TEP. We're here to help reduce that uncertainty with some EV transition planning. And regardless of the utility that you're operating, service territory that you're operating in, we all have one role in common, and that's the interconnection process. So if you're looking to install new charging stations, most likely you need an interconnection. And so talk to your utility early and often so that that can be a seamless process.
Terrific. Thank you. This has been the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop, Fleet Modernization, Major Savings for Arizona. If you tuned in late or you'd like to watch the entire program, the video will be available later on. Let's thank our panelists again. Dan Steller, State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Arizona, Diane Brown, Executive Director of the Arizona PERG Education Fund, Camila Martins-Beckott, who's with Tucson Electric Power in Customer Energy Optimization, and Jesse Schneider, EV Manager for ADOT. Thank you all, panelists. Thank you all for watching this morning. I'm Steve Goldstein.